Hello and welcome back to Read Becca. We are yet again here finishing up the little last bits of wrap up of 2021 with my favorite nonfiction reads of 2021. And these were obviously not all published in 2021. This list is non-specific number of books in a non-specific order. I did not categorize these or anything, so it's all over the place. And I did notice, though, that I didn't really read very much history or biography last year. Very little of what I read was. But the couple of history things that I did read ended up on this list. So I think I need to really rethink how I'm picking things out and focus more in that area. So let's get into the books. And as I said, no specific order. So the first two I have were really honorable mentions. So my honorable mentions were The Storyteller by Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl is a musician, the kind of founding member of the Foo Fighters. He was formerly in Nirvana. He did a lot of different projects. And ultimately, why this is not on my actual favorites is that it's a celebrity memoir. It's a very, very good celebrity memoir, but it is a celebrity memoir. And Dave wrote this really, really well, I have to say. I was very surprised by just how adept he was at writing. And he manages to capture this amazing heart to his story where you're getting these wild rock star stories for sure, but mostly it's very grounded in his family life as a child, how he connected with music so strongly in his youth, the conflict that it created with his family, and then as an adult, his beautiful relationship with his kids and his encouraging them to find their own passions, which maybe music, maybe not, but many of the instances that are talked about are the successes musically that his kids have. So it just is an end-to-end beautiful memoir, and I really, really enjoyed it. For me, it has that nostalgia factor of him being an artist that I really connected with. So for me, it was a really, really excellent read. The second one that was an honorable mention is The Martyrdom of Colin's Catch the Bear by Gerry Spence. Now, this one is maybe more biography or closing in on biography. It is the story of this Colin's Catch the Bear, who is an Indigenous man that was sentenced for the murder of a white man. And in this situation, the white man was kind of harassing an encampment of Indigenous people who were staying on public land, and then was shot and murdered. And there are a lot of questions about the situation that happened and whether Colin's Catch the Bear was even in proximity, whether there were questionable things about these statements that people there made. Lots of questions about the details. And this is written by his trial lawyer, Gerry Spence. So it has a very interesting perspective. What he manages to do is not focus in so much on that trial, but focus in personally on Colin's life. And it goes end to end, again, from childhood all the way up to the end of his life, and how he spent most of his life in the system. From childhood, we see how much the system failed him. And that's what this captures the most, is even in the worst of times, when we're following Collins as a child, I had the sense of empathy for these parents that were really terrible parents. They were neglectful and abusive and alcoholic, but it was extremely clear how badly the system had pushed them into that, how the system failed everyone in this community. From the supports that should have been there to help them were actively hurting them. So I think it was extremely, extremely powerful how that was told. Now, what I didn't like about this, that I think leaves it on my honorable mentions, is that it being written by the trial lawyer, it is told in a way that's extremely readable. It's really very readable, and it's quite short, but it's told in a way that any nonfiction is going to have the bias of the author, but it's clear he's leading you to the viewpoint that he wants to get across. And so I don't really like to have that strong of a narrative, I guess, to my nonfiction. So I had to kind of keep it there, but I really enjoyed reading this, and I thought it was extremely well told from someone who's not a traditional author. So very good one. So onward to my actual list. Now, I don't have very many of these physically, and because my light has gone at this point, I tried to catch light before we got to sunset, and it's about 3:30 and we're already having some sunset vibes. So I think the covers are going to be very washed out, but I'm going to do my best to get these on here so you can see the covers. So the first one, I do also have a very specific caveat. Firstly, we have Sissy, a coming of gender story by Jacob Tobia. Now, this one, I don't seem to have a problem with saying the title on video, but when this was coming up during my current reads, people were commenting on it and YouTube was wiping all of the comments. So if you do want to talk about this one, just don't use the title. So anyway, getting into what this one is about. This is a memoir. This is a very, very straightforward, typical memoir told in kind of just stories from Jacob's life. And what is so powerful about this one and why it's on this list is that this is not your typical, just absolute horrific, trauma-filled memoir of a queer coming out. This tackles, starting as a very young child, the societal pressures of masculinity, being born male, and then the staged coming out as first gay and then genderqueer, non-binary. And so those are things I hadn't really seen, but specifically in this case, from a mostly well-supported person. They were supported in their church. They were supported by their family for the most part. They didn't have any really extreme traumas, and that enabled them to have these really great empowerment moments where they're now in an advocacy position and they've been able to step out and take risks I don't think they would have been able to take if they didn't have that kind of active support system that we see throughout this. It also had a lot of the complicated discussion of cultural significance of high heels that I have talked about repeatedly, both with this book and another book that's going to be on this list later. So yeah, I really strongly enjoyed this one. So number 2 is another one that I've talked about quite incessantly, and that is How to Be a Good Creature by Montgomery. Those are just beautiful illustrations. We'll get a couple of the illustrations here so you can see them. But this is, Sai is known as a scientist, and she does include facts here, but this is not a fact-filled book at all. This is very close personal memoirs and her personal experiences with these animals. So this is told through a number of individual chapters that are one animal per chapter, so you could dip in and out of this. And it was so powerful how she has these extreme connections to not just pets, but animals that she's interacted with in her work. And she makes these very personal connections that deeply affect her and change her over the years. So this is the story of how those animals changed her into the person that she is. I would say this has some extremely heavy content. It has a lot of depression and suicidal ideation in here. It has loss of pets for sure. She goes through the grief of losing pets multiple times through this book. So really it is that emotional impact of working with animals and having such a connection with animals over the course of your life. So I just really, really loved this one and heartily recommend it to everyone. Then we have kind of, I would call it an informational memoir. So this mixes personal memoir with facts. So this is I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austen Channing Brown. And she is telling her experiences personally from a school perspective, from a job perspective, from a church perspective, and then incorporating into that the data. And so things like her name and why her parents named her Austen Channing Brown, so that it wasn't clearly race or gender identifying. So we all, I think, probably at this channel know a little bit about the stats there and how having your name show your gender or race on a resume may have an effect on your hiring, things like that. So she talks a lot about that. So you could use this as a stepping off point to get into other more fact-focused, data-focused books like Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Renee Ida Lodge, or White Too Long by Robert P. Jones, that focus in on topics that are skimmed here. And her story is the focus, and she tells stories that relate to the data that I hadn't really heard the personal experience about before. And that was what was so powerful about this one. Then I have Is Rape a Crime? A Memoir, an Investigation, and a Manifesto by Michelle Bowdler. And this one is really powerful because of how close a personal perspective it covers and the topics of the title. So this one begins after Michelle's rape. So this is a personal story of rape. She was a victim of a home invasion and a rape in an area where there was a string of rapes. So this seemed to be a serial criminal situation. And we start after the crime and follow her as her entire life is destabilized after the fact. So she loses the ability to function at her job and maintain her housing, things like that. And so that is something I hadn't really ever read about in significant personal detail before. She does come around to discussing the rape. So if you have any triggers about that, I mean, obviously the topic of this book is extremely difficult. So she as well does share that with her future wife, and goes through the difficulties of finding a support system initially after the rape, and the fact that the people that were in positions of power that kind of knew what was going on didn't really get her the resources that she needed, or not in the right ways for someone like her. And so that spurred her into an advocacy role. And that advocacy role was really triggered by a national news story that I personally remember seeing when it went national, is these backlogs of rape kits sitting in warehouses. And so she started questioning what happened to my rape kit. And what happened is infuriating. You'll get the nitty-gritty details of both her specific case and the broader case of how rape is being treated in the US broadly. And yeah, this was easily my most infuriating read of the year. I think this is important reading for everyone in our country. It's horrible, and it keeps coming back to the question of the title, where she pulls from the fact that when rape was a property crime, it was much more criminalized than it is now as a crime against a woman's body. So yeah, easily most frustrating read of the year. In a complete tonal shift here, this one is not going to do justice at all. This is Around the World in 80 Plants by Jonathan Drori and illustrations by Lucille Clerc. So I love this. This was so joyful and beautiful. This has 80 plants, as it says. They're kind of separated by region, really, but the organization is not great in this, I would say. If you're trying to use this as a reference, I would say it's not that. Lucille Clerc's illustrations are beautiful, and every page, including the index, is illustrated. But what you're getting here is a couple pages per plant, and it's crammed full of context for the plant. It's talking very lyrically and beautifully about the historical context for the plant, where it grows, how it grows, what its uses are in terms of art, in terms of food, culture, the significance of the plant. So it packs a ton into what little amount of text there is, and you can tell that Jonathan Drori has such a passion when he's talking about these plants. So it's just very, very lush, rich prose on every page. So I adored this one, and it immediately made me want to go out and verify that I could get my hands on any other books that he has. And he does have Around the World in 80 Trees, so I think you'll be seeing that on my TBRs this year. Next was one of those history books that I really, really loved this year, was Little Dancer Aged 14 by Camille Loren. And I absolutely adored this book. I loved making the video that I did for this book, so I did a standalone review of this, and I did a museum tour where I went to visit the Little Dancer. And I think I may redo that video this year, just as a caveat, because I have since figured out how to do music on my phone and can get better sound. So you may see a repost of that, but I will link the original down below. Just be aware that during the museum tour, you'll want to use closed captions for sure to get what I'm actually talking about. So this one is really a split between the story of Marie Van Gotham, who was the model for this statue, this bronze cast. And she was in the Paris Opera Ballet, and so we're talking about what was going on culturally and societally, and how she was this very low-class person, and how the society was treating the low class, and specifically the ballerinas that were low class. And then we get Degas and how Degas would have interacted with someone low class like this, why he posed her and sculpted her in the ways that he did, in terms of specifically leaning into social stereotypes about the lower class. This was extremely informative, and it's a translated work. The translator's name is Willard Wood, and it just gave me so much to think about this specific topic. And the topic of ballet history is something I'm specifically interested in, so I just adored learning this piece of history in a greater depth than I had read before across multiple other books that had kind of skimmed the beginnings of the Paris Opera Ballet. So really, really fascinating book. So finally, now that the lighting is quite dire, I can't really help the lighting any better than I have already, so I apologize. This is where we're at. My last pick is Dress Codes: How the Laws of Fashion Made History by Richard Thompson Ford. And I adored this book. I have a full video that I think was about an hour of discussion that I really heavily had to trim down because this evoked so many thoughts in me. This one is all about legal dress codes and societal dress codes throughout history. It talks about the way that dress is used for power, either trying to claim your own power or, more often, power oppressing others in lower classes by race or gender or sexuality. And in so many cases, it is the people in power preventing those who are oppressed from acting transgressively. So this was a great socio-cultural history for me that looked at things in a depth I hadn't seen before on the topic, and was coming from an author who is, I believe, a legal scholar in race. And so this really tackled it from a viewpoint that I had not seen before. So I just loved this. Definitely one of my top reads of the year. So that is what I have for all my favorite nonfiction. I really hope that you will check some of these out, because most of these are deeply underhyped and I don't see anybody talking about them. So please, please pick these great books up. Thank you so much for watching.